This is the FM Gold channel of All India Radio. In the program News Analysis, now we bring you a discussion on Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, a person to be remembered. The participants are Professor Rizwan Kaisar, political analyst, and Urmi Goswami, journalist.
Today we remember late President APJ Abdul Kalam. It's his second death anniversary, and this morning Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated his memorial in Rameshwaram. At the inauguration, speaking at the inauguration, the Prime Minister described the late President as one of India's noblest sons. It's true that President Kalam was not a political figure. Coming out of the scientific establishment, in many ways he was not known, and yet he was one of the most popular presidents we had. Professor Rizwan, what do you think contributed to his popularity?
Two things that can be said very distinctly about late President APJ Abdul Kalam. Number one, that he had tremendous desire to reach out to the people. And that way he was able to establish a kind of a emotional cord with the ordinary mass of the people, school children, young boys and girls, to inspire them. One would ideally like to put him as one of the great teachers of modern times who, without being a teacher, at any level of education imparting institution, be that a school, college or a university, he was essentially a scientist who established himself what later on people came to know as the Missile Man of India. But then his desire to teach, that remained with him for a very long time, right from the beginning of his presidency till the end, and even after his retirement, his desire was to keep on teaching. And just not teach students, but perhaps teach ordinary citizens. It is this that is what earned him this rubric as People's President. I mean, it's true that other presidents were as much popular, but APJ Abdul Kalam would take the lead among all the popular presidents who had this desire, and therefore the emotional cord that he was able to establish with the ordinary mass of the people. Part of the explanation could also be his own personal family and social background, that he came from relatively marginalized sections of Indian society. He made his way up, walked up, like he walked, we all know, he was a newspaper vendor, and from then on went on becoming to whatever that he became. So to that extent he understood people's psyche, and therefore he wanted to reach out them, that if it was possible for him to reach a place where he had ordinary mass of the people could also possibly imagine themselves to reach a place higher than what their resources would allow.
It's interesting that you mentioned this whole thing about him reaching out, especially to the young. If you remember that he actually, in a way, his passing was also exactly in that kind of a setting. He had gone to address students. Do you think he succeeded in redefining Indian presidency? Because presidents after that, again, are back to being very political figures, not in that sense have with outreach to the ordinary folk, to the young. How do you think he redefined presidency?
I mean, he redefined presidency in a very distinct manner. But if you look at it in terms of, I would like to look at it in personal accomplishment and also attempt to reach out. Say, for instance, personal accomplishment point of view, if you look at, he was as much a man of great accomplishment, coming the kind of marginalized social background that he did, reached a place where he did. But then he was more like a reflective philosopher, thinker, a writer, whereas APJ, despite being a technology man, was also communicator in his own style. Right. And therefore he thought that if you could speak to them in common man's language, that should also mean common woman's language. And then try to inspire them that it's possible to break the glass ceiling and then reach out. And therefore he kept on some of the quotes that went on to become popular quotes. Say, for instance, the famous thing that he said, dream is not what you dream when you are asleep. Dream is something that you dream while you are awake. Kind of books that he wrote became Wings of Fire, etc. These were attempts on his part to reach out to the larger audience. He wasn't someone who was reticent. He wasn't someone who was really confined. But as I said, at the cost of repeating, part of the reason for him to do that was to inspire younger generation. People knew about his background, and therefore also people from the marginalized background to develop capacity and start imagining themselves to be reaching out to heights which otherwise may look beyond their capacity to reach. So that way, he emerged as a very effective communicator and someone who could collectively, at a national level, do mentoring of the younger generation.
The other interesting aspect of late President Kalam was the fact that in some ways he embodied what we would understand to be a secular modern person, in which whatever his faith was a personal matter for him. We never saw him talk about, those issues which seem to be divisive or of personal concern, whether it's faith or it's caste. Do you think, and that seems to be missing, that was like almost something unusual that happened with him and his presidency. Do you think that he was in that sense one of the sort of epitomes of the modern secular Indian in that sense, in that he believed that religion and other creed issues like that were a matter of personal faith and not of public parading?
What I can say in this context, number one, as is defined in the Constitution, the office of the President of India is actually above every such narrow considerations of caste, creed, religion, culture, language, politics, whatever. So to that extent, yes, he was in true sense embodiment of what is expected of the President of Republic of India. So to that extent, he was performing his constitutional duties. However, looking at it personally, because whatever position that you hold is not free from the kind of background that you come from. As a matter of conviction, he thought in eclecticism that Indian society, culture, the larger value system that we seem to entertain had really ingrained in him. And therefore, he did not look at any sector of the society, faith, language, whatever, with the prism of sectarian approach. As a matter of fact, he was too eclectic, broad-minded, and truly imbibed values from old traditions, be that Hinduism, Islam, and whatever that we experience in our day-to-day life. So to that extent, I would say he was embodiment of the larger values. We may not believe in a particular faith, and yet you realize that the value emanating from that faith touches your, heart and mind somewhere. APJ Abdul Kalam was someone who did not only allow these things to touch, he imbibed them. And therefore, in several of his public exposure, he used to mention it. And to that extent, yes, he was true embodiment of Indian cultural worldview. He was true embodiment of the requirement of the President of the Republic of India. And I think that way, he has left behind tremendous precedent for future presidents to follow. I'm sure they all would be fully conscious of what they are going to do, because that's the requirement of an office.
The other thing I remember about President Kalam is the herb garden that he set up. His whole thing about using Rashtrapati Bhavan and its ample area to create this garden, inviting school children in. It seemed in my memory to be one of those moments where the Indian presidency came alive, because otherwise it's a constitutional position, it's a ceremonial position, so everything is done in his name, but it sort of brought it alive. So I'm thinking that as we remember him today, what do you think is the most fitting way to honor a man whose life has been about sort of success against all odds, knowing that there is a better future ahead, living with that dream, as you're saying, dream when you're awake, not when you're asleep. What do you think as a nation would be the biggest fitting tribute we can give this man?
The biggest and the most fitting tribute that a nation can pay to APJ Abdul Kalam is the sweet memory that he has left behind. And mind you, it's just that the community after community of the nation, say for instance, if we were to refer to the scientific community, the defense community, they all would remember missile that he created. If you were to really look at the medicine community, then the nuclear medicine area was one such area where APJ played a very important role. If you look at in terms of prosthetic technology, he was able to make use of the nuclear technology in order to build prosthetic system which would help lakhs and millions of people whose lives are affected because of one thing or the other. Then you realize on the one hand you have this. On the other hand, you have younger generation, you have school-going children, you have people who have dream about India, And here is APJ, who is inspiring them to dream about themselves and dream about their country. So therefore, I think he has left behind huge corpus of remembrance. And that sweet memory that he left behind, someone who was accessible, reachable, and he also created conditions for others to reach out to him. And then you realize that's one way of paying that kind of, what you say, fitting tribute to the memory of a man known as APJ Abdul Kalam.
Today when the Prime Minister inaugurated the memorial, which is in Rameshwaram, which is also very nice because, normally the tendency is to get everything in Delhi, everything is focused here. And I was reading that there are plans for a planetarium, an auditorium as part of that memorial. And the other interesting thing, taking off from where you mentioned, is people from the defense establishment, from the scientific community, people who are interested in planning, they all came together in this endeavor. So yes, you're right, it lives true. I was thinking that, what are your expectations of this memorial?
I think in due course of time, planners definitely would like to refashion out this memorial built in the name of APJ. And that would be a memorial dedicated to the entire scientific community of India, not of contemporary times, but also historical times from Aryabhat onwards. And therefore, make it an opportunity for ordinary citizens to have a peep into the long history of scientific and technological accomplishments of Indians at all stages in the entire course of history. That would be one. That would be a fitting tribute because here is someone who is part of a larger lineage. Therefore, I would say memorial, yes, to his life, exclusively dedicated, and yet at the same time we can create a space within this memorial so that we are able to use this opportunity to expose younger generation of India's population to the accomplishment of the great scientists and mathematicians and all that.
If anything else, late President Kalam would be rather unhappy with the state of fact that India falls behind in terms of its size of its scientific community, their ability to accomplish, and I think you're right, he would have liked this institution in his name to actually be forward-looking as well as mindful of its history. One of the things, many things that constantly amazes me about both the office of the presidency and President Kalam is that while everybody remembers him as an extremely popular president, as somebody who was different, in a sense the institution didn't change. It's almost like after him it receded back to being the way it was. You had a political person, then you had another political person. Do you think that, is it that we were not appreciative enough of a person who didn't come with political baggage, but who came with actually the desire to take India to, aware of India's glorious past or history, if not as glorious past, definitely its history, and wanted to take it forward to a more glorious place?
I think one would recall some facts of history to say that there were presidents of the Republic in the past who did not come from political background. Say, for instance, two names that I would remember. Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan came from the community of educationist, philosophy, etc. There is another person who occupied the Rashtrapati Bhavan was Dr. Zakir Hussain, who came from the background of education, though he had the experience of being the governor of Bihar before becoming the vice president and subsequently president. But essentially, Dr. Zakir Hussain was also an educationist. So, there are times when people fall back on personalities whose accomplishment that India would be. Allow me to repeat names of Dr. Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan and Dr. Zakir Hussain. In the same tradition, Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam was brought in there. But to say one person is really going to establish a president for a very long time, then you see president had already been there, which made it possible for APJ to be in the Rashtrapati Bhavan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You were listening to a discussion on Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, a person to be remembered. The participants were Professor Rizwan Kaisar, political analyst, and Urmi Goswami, journalist. The program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of All India Radio. This program is also available on our website newsonair.nic.in. You may email your opinion about this program at airnsdtalks@gmail.com.